and the Trinity. But yeah, just something though, in my most recent stuff. So more like the existence of God stuff. I am sort of in the middle of taking grounding to be analogous to causation.
To causation,
Yeah, but it also being a form of causation. So there's sort of a divide in the grounding sort of community between Alistair Wilson, so like a professor at Birmingham, and Jonathan Schaffer, who's like the main guy on the issue. Where Schaffer's taking grounding to be analogous, and Wilson takes it to be identical to a form of causation. So he calls it metaphysical causation. So grounding is a type of causation. I'm sort of in the middle of that, and in my most recent work, I actually side more with Wilson, and I take grounding to be a type of causation. So he would say that you've got to divide grounding you've got to divide causation into two types or two tokens within the category. So you have nomological causation and you have metaphysical causation. Nomological causation is normal causation. It's diachronic, temporal sequence. But metaphysical causation is a synchronic relation, as grounding is normally understood to be. And he thinks that because there is the similarity between grounding and causation is so much that it's better just to identify grounding as a type of causation. I've sort of sided with him more. So in my most recent stuff on like the existence of God,
Just taking a picture.
Okay. I sort of identify it as a type of a type of causation. But yeah, just sorry, with the Aquinas stuff, I'm just not the guy.
Can I just read you a quote from him? Because so you get what I'm saying. So this is in the Summa, part 1, question 33. He says no problem. So he says, the word principle signifies only that whence another proceeds. Since anything whence something proceeds in any way, we call it principle. And conversely, as the Father then is the one whence another proceeds, it follows that the Father is a principle. The Greeks use the word cause and principle indifferently when speaking of God, whereas the Latin doctors do not use the word cause, but only principle. The reason is because principle is a wider term than cause, as cause is more common than element or principle. For the first term of a thing, as also the first part, is called the principle, but not the cause. And then he goes on further to say, now the wider a term is, the more suitable it is to use as regards to God, because the more special terms are, the more they determine the mode adapted to the creature. Hence this term cause seems to mean diversity of substance and dependence of one from another. See, that's now the language he's using, which is not implied in the word principle. For in all kinds of causes, there is also to be found between the cause and the effect a distance of perfection or of power, whereas we use the term principle even in things which have no such difference, but have only a certain order to each other, as when we say that a point is the principle of a line, or also when we say that the first part of a line is the principle of a line. So he seems to have a problem with using the term cause as opposed to principle, and three of the reasons why is he thinks that cause actually implies a difference in substance, and the second is that he thinks that it implies dependency, which you would agree, and then the third is that he thinks there's a distance of perfection from the cause and the effect. So my question is, obviously it seems like you don't know, which is fine, because I know you're not an expert on Aquinas, and I'm not either, so I'm genuinely asking, because if principle isn't understood in terms of some type of causation or dependency relation, then how is it being utilized? How does it cash out in the metaphysics of Aquinas' system? You know what I mean? Because he's denying any type of dependency because he says that's his concern for using the word cause. But then what is the relationship? That's what I don't really understand.
This is from someone who's an amateur when it comes to mystic sort of metaphysics, but I'm trying to think that the way he would see it is because maybe there is not a numerical distinction between the persons, so he'll only hold to some sort of qualitative or relational distinction between them. So I think using the term cause assumes that there is a numerical distinction between whatever is the relator of that, so the input and the output of that causation relation. So I'm assuming what his understanding must be is because he doesn't see them as being numerically distinct, given divine simplicity. I think for him, principle allows him to have some form of distinction without it entailing a numerical distinction. That's what I'm thinking. But I would need to go and read more. There's a very good book. What's his name? I think it's Gilbert or Guillory Emery or something like that, which is the Trinitarian theology of Thomas Aquinas. I would point you towards that. So it's published by OUP, so Oxford University Press. I think it's Emery, and it's a Trinitarian theology of Thomas Aquinas. So I think that he'll probably tackle that there. But yeah, generally I don't really look with Aquinas. Like I was saying to you, I take a lot from him. He's a doctor of the church. I'm Catholic, so I respect him and I take a lot of what he's saying. But I think when it comes to Trinitarian theology, he didn't add much above that of the Patristics, so the Cappadocians, or if you're taking some parts of Augustine.
Because he seems to be, he's appealing to the Latin fathers and saying, and I don't know if it's true or not, but he's basically saying this is how they conceive of it. He sees himself in that tradition, and to me, that's not my understanding of how even some of the early Latin fathers understood it. It seems clear to me that they did understand it in some type of dependency. And so that's why I struggle to really understand what he means by principle.
I think even there's good work by Louis Ayres on Augustine. And I think, like you were saying, he sort of sees Augustine as being very close to the Cappadocians and the Greeks. More than what's been assumed.
Although on the Filioque, it's
Filioque you'll have more problems. But I think there is quite a clear sort of pro-Nicene trajectory,
I agree.
Similarity in understanding of what the Trinity is.
I agree.
And then later on you have this sort of divide that comes in and more overemphasis of some elements of it. I'm interested to ask as well. So we always had back and forth on the Trinity, Monarchy, and the Father stuff. So are there any specific issues that you have with that monarchical Trinitarian view in particular, or would you say for you you're more accepting of that understanding, not saying obviously affirming its veracity, but saying, if Trinitarianism is correct, that's more the correct view, or do you see issues with it? Or
depends. You mean from like a historical angle, or from
any angle really? So it could be philosophically, it could be historically that you have an issue. What sort of
I think it's historically grounded. I think that it's very clear in 4th and 5th century church fathers, definitely like the Cappadocian fathers, even people like St. Augustine and others. So I think it's clearly there historically. My problem with it obviously is the dependency thing, which is one, which we've talked about a lot. But the other concern is, and I actually did a video on this where I played clips from one of your interviews with Dale Tuggy. And the issue that I see is that I don't think the monarchy of the Father position really solves the problem of tritheism. Because in the end, you do say several times within that interview, unless maybe it was off the cuff and you didn't mean it, but the way you presented it was as such, that in a certain sense there just are 3 gods. So I don't know if you would agree with that or not, because you even went into the whole thing with what's his name, Balcom, and explaining the difference between what was the phrase again? The different types of monotheism, quantitative and qualitative monotheism. In which case, it seems to me, quantitatively you're saying there's 3 gods, but qualitatively there's one. And depending on how you cash it out, because of some type of relation or whatever. So to me that's problematic, because it really hasn't, in other words, what sort of work is the monarchy doing if at the end it's still quantitatively polytheism. You see what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, the main thing for me is just how getting our language corresponding to the metaphysics. And the metaphysics of the matter is saying there is one fundamental entity in all of reality. The structure of reality, that layered structure of reality, there's one thing that's existing at the bottom level. The most fundamental entity, the absolute fundamental entity, I will identify as the Father. So everything above that level, everything above the level of the Father is a derivative entity, including that of the Son and the Spirit. And so the semantics of the matter, the language use of the matter is, we use the word God in that hotheos sense, the God, the thing, okay? We refer that term to whatever is at that fundamental structure of reality. And so I'm saying to you as someone who affirms the monarchy of the Father, is saying the monarchy of the Father cashes that out, because it's saying, well, the one thing is the Father and the Father alone. A sort of, let's say, Bo's use of the word egalitarian, or the conventional understanding of the Trinity would say, no, we put all three persons in that fundamental structure. And I think that's when you have the problem. But what I'm saying is that there's only one particular object, one particular substance, which is at that bottom level, which is the Father alone. And that's the same type of monotheism I think all the other monotheistic religions affirm. Obviously, Islam wouldn't use the term maybe person for Allah, that you wouldn't use maybe that terminology, but you would say, if we're counting how many entities there are at that fundamental structure, well, there's only one entity. I think Jews will affirm the same thing. And I'm trying to say to you, Christians affirm that same thing as well. Everything above the Father is derivative. Yet, derivative status and fundamentality is nothing to do with the nature of these individuals. It's the way in which they exist. And so, the Father,
unlike what Aquinas seemed to suggest.
So I mean, I'm happy to diverge on Aquinas on this point.
And again, that's just a quote. To be fair, I could be misreading them, but that's in a straightforward sense. That's how it seems.
I mean, I'm happy to diverge on.
Aquinas. No, it's fine.
So it's just saying that. What I was trying to say to you is the way in which they exist. The Father has a way of existing, which is that of being fundamental. And the Son and the Spirit have a derivative status. Yet they share the same nature in that they exemplify whatever it is to be divine. And so, and that's nothing to do with fundamentality. So what I'm trying to say to you is that the usage of, when we're counting gods, we need to know what we mean by the term God. And I would say the use of the word God is normally referenced to the fundamental divine person, or divine thing, if you don't want to use the term person. And so the fundamental divine entity within this Trinitarian framework is one thing, the Father. So we are only counting one God, even though you might say we're counting three divine persons. And so I'm trying to push this idea that there's a distinction between Trinitarian, Unitarian, monotheism, polytheism. Monotheism is to do with fundamentality. How many fundamental divine persons? I would say monotheism in Trinitarianism is, well, there's one fundamental divine person, the Father alone. And so Muslims and Christians can share and high five on this matter. But there's only one divine person, if you use the term person as well, the Father and Allah in your worldview. Yet we are Trinitarian because we believe that there is more than one divine entity, which we include the Son and the Spirit. Yet you're Unitarian because you only believe there is only one divine entity as well. And so I don't think the even though I might have used the term God, I think I tried my best in that. Maybe it might not have been that interview, or might be the ones after it, where I brought in that distinction between, the way that we use the word God. Well, I'm happy to say there are three gods. If you're using that term in the synonymous way with divine or divinity, there are three divine persons. I don't think there's any problem with that. There's only one God in the true sense of the word, because there's only one fundamental thing.
But then, in that case, and not without noticing, you're purposely equivocating on the word God. Because there's one God in the sense that there's one fundamental divine person, which is the Father alone. But then, in another sense of the word God, there are three gods in the sense that there are three divine persons. Because typically in English, at least when we're talking about God, to be divine simply is just to have all the properties and qualities that are necessary and sufficient to be God. And so if you have three individuals, each one that have that, then it seems like you have three gods. So again, that's not then to say that we back project that and say there are three fundamental entities. No, there's still one fundamental entity. So there's one God in one sense, but there's three gods in another sense, which me as a Muslim, as well as other Muslims, would have a concern with that, because you still have three entities which are divine, and there's a certain sense in which you can say, well, quantitatively, it's not monotheistic. Now, if you're referring to only fundamentality, then yeah, there's only one of them. But so that's still, to me, is still the concern, because I guess I don't see a significant difference between admitting three fundamental entities and having one fundamental entity. The other two are not fundamental, but also are considered God. That's kind of my worry, is that I don't really see, even coming from a Trinitarian perspective, what would be the necessity of the monarchy of the Father in that sense, because you're still in reality affirming something that the egalitarians would want to. You just think that you add this fundamental quality that the Father alone has. I don't think that it really does enough work to solve what really would be at issue for Muslims.
It might not be sufficient for Muslims, but I think when we're looking about the language use of the term God, I think it's a referential term which is not just fulfilled by something being divine. I think if you look throughout Scripture, or you look throughout church history, it wasn't just that this entity is divine that makes it the one God.
I agree. It was much more fluid.
I would say, because I mean, if you look at the Old Testament, you look at the New Testament, you look then into, let's say, the first 3 to 4 centuries. Divinity wasn't the issue. It literally wasn't. I mean, because as Borkham, as Larry Hurtado, as other individuals who have looked at Second Temple Judaism, there were loads of individuals that accepted other divine entities. And so it's and Larry Hurtado's really pushed this idea that we need to be so clear that within ancient Jewish monotheism, the issue wasn't about divinity, because the Jews accepted many divine entities within their worldview, but that didn't stop them from affirming monotheism. Their understanding of monotheism was that we worship one God, and the reason why we worship one God is because he is the sole creator of all reality, and he is not created by anything else. And so why we don't worship any idol or anything like that is because we weren't created by him, and that thing has created itself. And so the issue then is about fundamentality. The Jewish practice and the belief throughout ecclesiastical history was why we look to the Father and the Father alone, and Jesus himself pointing to and saying this is the one true God, is because of the fundamental aspect that he is the ultimate source of all of reality. And even natural theology points to that. Natural theology doesn't lead us to just a divine entity. Natural theology leads us to a divine entity who is the fundamental thing.
Yeah, we agree on that.
So what I'm saying to you is that not just natural, so you have natural theology, you have scriptural usage, you have ecclesiastical history, where it's actually the term God, the one that's most important, isn't its usage to say that something's divine. It is this entity divine and fundamental? If it is divine and fundamental, then it is the one that we give sole worship to. Because even as a Trinitarian, we worship the Father. Even though we worship Christ who is the medium between us and the Father. And so ultimately everything goes to the Father because he's the ultimate source of all of reality. And so what I'm trying to say to you is that the monarchy of the Father allows us to ground that understanding that actually the important usage of the word God when it comes to monotheism and polytheism is how many fundamental entities are there within your worldview. If you affirm more than one, then you are polytheistic. If you affirm one, then you are monotheistic. Yet you might not be a Unitarian. So a Unitarian is one who then affirms only one divine entity. So I think that distinction between monotheism, Unitarianism, polytheism, and Trinitarianism needs to be made there. And that's what I'm trying to say to you, the monarchy of the Father allows us to have.
I just think that from an Islamic paradigm, maybe we could say that the understanding of monotheism is stricter because the way that the Quran defines shirk, which is basically associating partners with God, is not necessarily to say that there's an entity which you're saying is the fundamental layer of reality, like the Father. In fact, it quite frequently uses the term God to refer to things that even the individual themselves does not consider to be the fundamental layer of reality. For example, in the Quran, I think it's in chapter 45, verse 23, it mentions quite specifically, have you not seen those who worship their own desires as a God besides Allah? And then says that this is essentially shirk. In the following verse, it tells you what those people say. They say that there's nothing but this worldly life. We live and we die and nothing destroys us but time. Well, what does that sound like? Modern atheism. And so what the Quran is saying, even if you don't say that this being is the fundamental layer of reality, or even use the word God in a lesser sense, not even to refer to the fundamental reality, is still problematic, because you're attributing things that in the Islamic paradigm are due to God alone to other entities that are not fundamental, whether it be your own desires, whether it be Jesus from our perspective, obviously, whether it be Mary because of certain things that we think are too extravagantly applied to her, etc., etc. So the Quran also has a looser meaning of the term God, but in a different sense. It has a wider approach to say that no, strict monotheism is this. It's not only fundamental, but any type of quality, for example, omniscience. If you want to attribute omniscience to another being like the Son or the Holy Spirit, even if you say that they're not fundamental, it's still problematic. So that's why I said, in what aspect did you want to address the question? Because from an Islamic paradigm, theologically speaking, it's still problematic to say that you have these two other things that are divine, even if they're not fundamental, because the Quran sees it as you giving things qualities or attributes that are ascribed to God alone in the fundamental sense to these other beings. Even if it's not fundamentality, could be omniscience, could be omnipotence, whatever, and that itself Quran deems as problematic. Okay. You know, so yeah. I'm just saying, I'm not using that as an argument, but I'm saying as
my only thing is that with Christianity and with Islam, something that we need to uphold, and I think we fully uphold in our worldviews, is that there is a continuity with what came before Christianity and Islam. Obviously, Islam would say it's been here since the beginning, but let's just, for the sake of the argument, say it came around, the 6th century. Yeah. And so you have Islam, you have Christianity. What is always upheld in both of these worldviews is continuity with Judaism. And so what happens a lot of the time when I do speak to Muslims is that Christians have walked away from the monotheism of the past. Let's say you find it within the Jewish paradigm. And what I'm trying to say to you is that maybe there was a more tightening of the understanding of monotheism when it came to the Islamic worldview. But what I'm trying to say to you is that there is a continuity between Christianity and Judaism. And so even if there is a divergence when it comes to Christianity and Islam, that is not problematic. There will be a problem if you were to point to me and say, well, Jews understood monotheism in this specific sense, and not just obviously saying ancient Judaism, but let's even say Second Temple Judaism, so the time of Jesus. Yeah. The immediate followers of Jesus understood monotheism in this specific sense, and Christians have moved away, then that will be a problem. But what I'm trying to say to you is that there's a continuity between Judaism and Christianity in affirming monotheism. And so maybe there's a difference when it comes to Islam, but then Islam has a problem then, if that's the case, because continuity of belief needs to be there. If you are saying that this religion has been here since the beginning, and it's the religion that we find in Judaism, maybe corruption came in, but it's the same nucleus there, it's the same religion that is then explicated fullest at the time of Prophet Muhammad, then you must have continuity and connectedness of belief. Yeah. But if there's a breaking of that, and I'm saying there's a breaking of that when it comes to monotheism, then there's a problem there in claiming continuity and connectedness of belief. Christians don't have that, because we're trying to say, actually, in Second Temple Judaism, this is the understanding of monotheism that Christians have upholded all the way up to Nicaea.
Yeah, but what about before that? Do you think that the Jews always believed that, and can that be demonstrated historically.
Yes.
I don't think that.
Well, I would say to you.
Would you make that strong of a claim?
Oh wait, not to. Are you saying Trinitarianism itself?
No. I'm
Or
saying
the understanding of monotheism. Yeah.
the understanding of monotheism in the sense that it's problematic to associate things with God, not just in the nominal sense of using the word God, because we see that in the Old Testament with Moses, for example, is made a god to Pharaoh, Elohim, and things like that. That's not what I mean. What I mean is in the sense that there were Jews that believed in the monarchy of the Father and that didn't believe in the existence of the Son and the Spirit, and would use the term God loosely and fluidly to refer to other beings, but never understood that those other beings were equal to the Father.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, obviously prior to the time of Christ, there wasn't that maybe clear, explicated understanding of there being two other divine persons.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to say to you is that for the whole point of what I'm trying to explain is that monotheism wasn't to do with divinity. That's what I'm really trying to emphasize here. And so if there was more than
but
one
was
divine,
that universally held by the Jews?
I would say it's been quite clearly shown by quite a few scholars. I think a clear one is Michael Hyde. I mean, he is a Christian, but he's done phenomenal work on the Old Testament and the understanding of monotheism in the Old Testament. And so it's sort of this idea of the divine council.
I'm familiar with all that material. But I'm saying, is there descending or opinions that are scholarly that disagree with those theories, in the sense that that's not, although that may have been held by some Jews, doesn't mean that it was universal.
Oh yes, of course. I mean, in any field, you could always find scholars disagreeing on stuff. But you go with what's the majority, and also who's the most reputable in the field, who people are then being most influenced by in their sort of scholarly work. And I think a lot of people would look to individuals who have been tackling this issue. So, for example, Larry Hurtado, I think he's played a massive role in sort of ancient Jewish monotheism, understanding what that is. And he has shown clearly in his work that, and even Richard Borkham himself, even though he's a Christian, I think a lot of scholars look to his work as being very, very influential. Even Hurtado himself pointed to Borkham prior to his death.
I'm not saying all this stuff is nonsense.
So I'm saying to you that obviously you'll have divergence of opinion in any field, but a number of reputable scholars would say actually monotheism, correctly understood, was to do with worship practice, and the idea that actually we worship the one God, the Father, and we don't worship any other deity, we don't sacrifice to any other deity, and that's what grounded monotheism. Yet belief in more than one deity wasn't a problem. So Hurtado really